All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to CMS Rulemaking for 2026, A View from the Trenches. We're glad you're here. Today, we're going to be having a short webinar, really going over some of the major rules changes to the physician fee schedule and to OPPS from the latest round of rulemaking. We're going to just cover a few brief things because there's a lot to go over, obviously. But we did look at who is going to be here and what you guys do, and we tried to tailor what we're going to cover today to those things that interest you. And we're uniquely positioned to provide you with this information because our firm has been doing nothing but looking at CMS rulemaking and dealing with CMS for many years, especially our principal, John Warren. So just a little bit of housekeeping before we start. We do not have the video or camera enabled. The chat is enabled, but we also have the Q&A feature. So if you have questions or comments you want to make throughout the presentation, you're free to add them to the Q&A feature. And we're probably going to handle all those at the end of the call just to get through the stuff that we have, but we'll leave time to make sure we get into those. So before we begin, I just want to introduce the people who will be guiding us through here. John Warren is our principal at Gettysburg, former official at the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and is a consultant and has been working for many years in the industry. He leverages a deep understanding of the federal healthcare financing process, including coverage coding and reimbursement for his clients. And we're also joined by Kent McKinney, who's got over 30 years of leading Fortune 500 companies through federal healthcare reform, product commercialization, and market access. Kent works with clients to gain and maintain market access for their products. He's also currently an adjunct professor at the Joseph Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia University. So welcome you two. And the first thing we're going to do is focus on the physician fee schedule changes and then talk a little bit about the OPPS changes. And as I said, we're going to leave the final part of the webinar to address any specific questions or comments from participants. So please put them in the Q&A as they come up for you. So with that, I'll turn it over to John and Ken.
Thanks, Great. Sean. Appreciate that introduction. And I really do want to give everybody a big shout out for joining us today. I know everybody's schedules are incredibly busy, and taking some time out to listen to us talk means a lot to us, especially since this is our first go through as a live webinar. So I appreciate everybody's patience as we walk through this.
So we also wanted to make certain that everyone understood that the information we're sharing here is just for general informational and educational purposes. There are a number of different payment policy reforms that are reflected in both the Medicare physician fee schedule and the outpatient prospective payment rules. So if you have specific questions about anything outside of what we're going to be presenting to you today, you can either reach directly out to us. We'd be happy to help you better understand any of the proposals in the fee schedules, and also provide more and greater clarity and detail around anything that we're talking about right now.
So just, go ahead, Kent.
Well, as Sean had mentioned, what we have done is we've crosswalked and aligned all of the participants, your organizations, and to some extent your commercial portfolios to the most relevant aspects of changes that you can expect to see in 2026 regarding Medicare physician and health systems and hospital outpatient payment that will most likely impact your product portfolios. So we've decided not to do this statutory download. And I think you'll notice that it's kind of different than other presentations that you may have sat in that talk about statutes. We're more devoted toward talking about the changes and what these changes could mean to your organizations, and more importantly, how you can get your organizations ready for these changes, both in the Medicare physician fee schedule and the outpatient prospective payment rules in 2026. there were key takeaways that we looked at, and we looked at every relevant policy in both of these payment rules. And we've distilled down what we think this audience needs to know in the top 4 areas. And so the first one is Medicare ASP reimbursement is starting to look a lot like Medicaid reimbursement, only insofar as the data that is required now and will be required in 2026 is conforming more to what we saw with CMS when they modified Medicaid reimbursement toward an actual acquisition cost several years ago. The second trend is that should be no surprise to anyone on the call, physician margin erosion and physician economics in general are continuing to withstand continued downward financial pressure, specifically on the drug margin, the Medicare Part B drug margin. We'll get into detail with specific examples of all of these as we progress through the discussion. The third trend is greater administrative burden on manufacturers, and we'll get into more detail there in just a moment. And in 2026, we're seeing much more drug pricing transparency, not surprising with the current administration. This time it's not only tighter ASP reporting under the Medicare physician fee schedule, but more increased transparency for the way that hospital outpatient departments acquire and pay for drugs, separately payable drugs in the hospital outpatient department.
All right, guys. So let's start with the changes to the physician fee schedule. What should people be aware of on how CMS is now going to determine payment for Part B drugs?
Thanks,
Yeah,
Sean.
I think the primary thing to remember here, and we'll talk a little bit about a little more color about this. One of the main things to keep in mind is starting in price applicability year of 2028, CMS is going to start negotiating prices for a number of Part B covered drugs. Now, they've been negotiating prices for Part D for a couple of years now, and we've seen the way that has affected what Medicare reimbursement looks like. We suspect that the same thing is going to happen under Medicare Part B. And that really aligns with the current administration's overall goal and overall mission of reducing the cost of drugs in the US.
On this particular payment reform that came out of the Medicare physician fee schedule, CMS announced new standards and reporting requirements for drug manufacturers in 2026 in response to the Office of the Inspector General report that came out in 2022, which recommended that CMS provide drug manufacturers greater and more clarification, greater information and greater clarification on bona fide service fees. And so with the final rule, the 2026 Medicare physician fee schedule final rule, CMS is doing just that. They're codifying and clearing up and adding greater clarity to what a bona fide service fee is, even though bona fide service fees remain eligible for exclusion from ASP. So that's a really important point I wanted to clarify here. Bona fide service fees are still eligible for inclusion from ASP. However, the increased administrative burden associated with this, the fair market value calculation, will definitely be something that drug manufacturers will want to know about. So in 2026, manufacturers will be required to submit documentation to CMS on how each drug manufacturer calculates the methodology that's used to calculate bona fide service fees. Even though they're still eligible for exclusion from ASP, CMS would like greater clarification from manufacturers on the methodology they use to establish bona fide service fees to be submitted with their quarterly ASP data. Okay. Now, for new service agreements starting January 1st forward, CMS will require the service provider of the bona fide service fees to attest or to certify through written documentation submitted to CMS about not only the methodology, but that they will have to attest that they're not submitting any of these bona fide service fees to their customers in order to make certain that ASP and ASP reimbursements from CMS are the most accurate that they possibly can be.
Yeah, and that
John,
last point, Kent, is really key. I'm sorry, Sean, I didn't mean to cut you off. That last point that Kent made is really key here, because I was at CMS when we were standing up the ASP system originally in 2005, 2006, 2007 timeframe. And one of the things that we wanted ASP to do was to be an accurate reflection of the market prices for these Part B covered drugs. And we recognized that manufacturers often paid third parties to perform particular services for them, whether it's logistics or storage or claims or some other service that they would otherwise do. We wanted to make sure that those bona fide service fees weren't actually hidden discounts. In other words, we wanted to make sure that manufacturers weren't manipulating the ASPs in a way that would raise the Medicare reimbursement rates under the Medicare program. So we allowed for bona fide service fees to be excluded from ASP if they met the three-pronged test of being an actual itemized service, being a service that the manufacturer would otherwise have provided in the absence of the agreement to provide the service, and that the fee not be passed on, or the fee not be passed on, excuse me, to the client or to the customer of the manufacturer. And I think what's happened over the past probably 12 years or so is there's been an increased emphasis, as you can see, on the screen. The OIG issued a report. Other oversight bodies have raised concerns with CMS that there are still, despite the best efforts of the agency, the possibility of abuse or improper use of some of the policy levers that CMS put together. So this particular policy is meant to kind of ensure, and almost double ensure, that bona fide service fees meet that three-part test, and that information, particularly for new services or for new service agreements, is documented so that manufacturers themselves and the agency have a paper trail that demonstrates that, yes, in fact, this fee for logistics or this fee for warehousing or whatever it happens to be is a legitimate bona fide service fee and should be carved out of the ASP.
All right. And as I understand it, they've also addressed some issues of price concessions and bundling.
Yes, that's right. So in the Medicare physician fee schedule, in 2026, CMS is increasing its interest, so to speak, in pricing transparency, specifically pricing transparency within bundles. It's hard to get into the bundles when they're pricing bundles and data bundles when manufacturers report these under ASP. CMS has offered a solution and a requirement for manufacturers to tease that out, to get more transparent in their bundles. And John, can you give us maybe a little bit of background on where the puck is going on this?
Yeah, very similar to what we were just talking about with bona fide service fees. The agency, when we stood up ASP, we recognized that there were discounts. We recognized that there were rebates, that there were other price concessions that were in play in the market and would continue to be in play in the market into the foreseeable future. What we struggled with here is when those price concessions are part of a bundled arrangement. In other words, we'll give you a discount if you buy X number of drugs or X dollars of our drugs across our entire portfolio. We'll give you a 10% discount or a 15% discount or whatever it happened to be. We struggled with what is the right way to allocate those bundled discounts across the entire purchase arrangement. And we tried some different alternative policies over time, but we continued, and I think even since I've left the agency has continued to be concerned, again, that ASP is an accurate reflection of what the market will bear for a particular product. So what the agency did here was originally propose a definition that was very much like the definition used in Medicaid of what a bundled sale is. In other words, any discount, whether it's contingent on some other purchase or non-contingent, has to be allocated proportionally across the sales of that manufacturer. So starting in 2026, manufacturers are going to be expected to appropriately allocate those discounts across all of the units of the drugs that are in the bundle. So there has to be a proportional allocation there, and that information needs to be available to CMS as well. Again, getting back to this issue that CMS, number one, wants more transparency into how drugs are priced, but number two, wants to make sure that it's not overpaying for drugs. We talked about the administration's current goals in terms of price reduction for drugs. This aligns right with those goals.
All right, John, thank you. And Kent, I know you were looking specifically at cell and gene therapy. Can you tell us what the important changes there?
Certainly. For audience members and drug manufacturers that are in the cell and gene space, there are some pretty significant payment policy changes, not surprisingly, coming up in 2026. Let me first establish the current payment methodology for CAR T therapy, which is one form of cell and gene therapy. Several years ago, CAR T manufacturers working in combination with physician societies worked together to establish a series of Category 3 codes associated not per se with a primary payment code, but separate payment codes in acknowledgement, quite frankly, of all the different steps that are associated with tissue harvesting, processing of T cells, and administering the T cells back into the patient. It got to be a little administratively burdensome to CMS. The Category 3 codes were sunsetted. Some were absorbed back into the primary payment code. So we saw an environment for CAR T where there was a tremendous amount of separate payment for the individual components that comprise CAR T therapy. That went away as of last year. And CMS is pulling that mentality of more bundling of these administrative and if you will, harvesting tissue processing services into the ASP payment. So starting in January 1st, another type of cell and gene therapy, which is autologous cell-based immunotherapy and gene therapy, will now be paid the same way that CAR T therapy has been paid in the past. So tissue processing, which was at one time under cell and gene therapies, particularly autologous cell and gene therapy, may have been reimbursed separately. In 2026, if you have an autologous cell and gene therapy, get ready to lose separate payment for cell harvesting, tissue processing, in lieu of a bundled payment for those services along with the primary J code for your drug product. So, John, I mean, I can only assume that this is more parsimonious ASP payment on behalf of CMS, but what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, I mean, I know we've got a lot to go over. So just really quickly, I think, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but this administration wants to lower the cost of drugs and to lower the cost of healthcare. So anything that they can do, I think, where you see, something like this happening, where CMS is bundling payments together, or they're doing things to deflate or lower ASP, that's all in alignment with what this administration wants to do. And I think we can say the same thing with this.
All right, thank you, John and Kent. So let's switch gears and talk a bit about the final OPPS rule. And what is this drug acquisition cost survey, John, that they've been planning?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. So again, broken record, right? CMS wants to make sure that they're paying appropriately for drugs. For the last number of years, and I don't even remember how many it's been at this point, the Medicaid program has been doing an actual acquisition cost survey where the Medicaid program is surveying sort of the market as a whole to determine what the actual acquisition cost for Medicaid drugs are. CMS now is taking that same concept of doing a survey to figure out or ascertain how much end users are actually paying to acquire drugs and applying that to the OPPS. So again, taking those methods that at least CMS sees as being effective in the Medicaid program and applying those to Medicare is another tool I think that the agency is using to make sure that their reimbursement rates, in this case under OPPS, are accurate and are accurately reflecting the acquisition costs that are out in the market. So again, I think this is another one where we're going to potentially see some shifts in the rates paid for drugs under OPPS, and certainly, we'll see an added burden on manufacturers and end users in terms of responding to and collecting the information necessary to respond to these kinds of surveys. But Kent, I mean, from a manufacturer's perspective, I have to imagine this really kind of throws a wrench into what they have to do on a daily basis too.
Well, I think there's some very turbulent headwinds that remind me of how 340B units were reimbursed at ASP. And then now with a similar kind of an exercise that CMS went through specific to 340B products, lo and behold, we see a reimbursement rate going from ASP plus 6 to ASP minus 22.5 for 340B. So if that's any indicator of what potentially this type of cost survey may entail, I think as a manufacturer, you should be aware of number one, the similarities and trends here that have happened, but also if your drug is a separately payable covered outpatient drug in the hospital outpatient department, you may want to make the business leaders aware of this cost survey without overly alarming them, of course, but it's never a bad idea to make sure that brand and brand finance are well aware of anything that changes reimbursement and payment.
And one other quick policy point here that I forgot to bring up. This isn't the first time that Medicare has looked at drug payment under OPPS and said, are we doing this right? Folks that may remember when OPPS and the ASP system were originally stood up again in the early 2000s, OPPS started off at ASP plus 4. OPPS actually doesn't require ASP as the basis for reimbursement. It allows the secretary the discretion to choose or to select an appropriate reimbursement rate. It's just for the past 15, almost 20 years at this point, the secretary has chosen to use ASP as that benchmark. Now, with this actual acquisition cost data, the secretary may choose to use a different methodology going forward.
All right, thank you. And Kent, I know that there was an interesting change for some radiopharmaceuticals that might signal kind of future policy changes. Do you want to walk us through that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. For policy and account management colleagues that may be on the phone that are managing portfolios of radiopharmaceutical products, I think there was a major shift in the way that radiopharmaceuticals, particularly pharmaceuticals derived from molybdenum-99, are going to be reimbursed in 2026. And it has to do with where the radioactive elements were sourced, whether they were sourced in Europe or whether they are sourced here in the United States. Not getting into too much of the background, the European nations subsidized the radioactive processing of elements for foreign manufacturers that were selling into the United States. And so CMS felt that that was an unfair payment advantage when they established payment rates and helped to subsidize or offset the cost of these generous foreign subsidies that were offered by foreign governments for sources in Europe. Going forward in 2026, CMS has established a $10 pass-through payment for, it's called TC99. And I know there are some manufacturers that have signed up for the conference that had those types of products. If you're selling a TC99 product, a radiopharmaceutical product, in Medicare in 2026, you can qualify for a $10 add-on payment under a new payment code, C9176, only if 50% or greater of your radioactive source was sourced here in the United States. John, this is a really interesting payment policy. Do you have any other kind of inside baseball on this?
I mean, this is really unique, Kent, in that this is really incentivizing manufacturers to bring the production of molybdenum 99 onshore to use domestic sources for the source material for creating this product. And to my knowledge, that's one of, if not the first time, that the agency or the HHS has actively encouraged and incentivized manufacturers to bring this manufacturing product, this manufacturing process onshore. And again, I'll go back to my sort of broken record kind of thing, but one of the other things the agency wants to do is really, and we've seen this through tariffs and some of the other, language that's come out of the White House lately, they want to encourage domestic production of everything. So I certainly think this is another example where the agency as a whole, not just CMS, but the United States government, is really incentivizing that domestic production. So I do think this is really unique. It'll be interesting to see whether this will translate in the future to additional pass-through type payments for other products that are maybe currently manufactured overseas, but are brought in domestically.
Yeah, that was going to be my question is, are we going to see this brought into other categories as well? So it'll be interesting to see. So yeah, thank you for that. So I'm sure there's lots more we can discuss, but we're getting towards the end of the half hour. And I wanted to give us some time to talk about the key takeaways again that we started with the beginning. You guys want to then kind of wrap up a little bit and tell us what we should be looking out for with these?
Sure. Yeah, just if everyone could remember that buy and bill reimbursement, it continues even in the Trump administration to face very stiff headwinds in almost nearly 90% of the proposals that we quite frankly did not even mention today. We see ASP and buy and bill reimbursement under assault in 2026. Increasing margin pressure on physician buy and bill in oncology and other areas continues to put pressure on physicians. The question would be or should be, how much more can physicians withstand under Medicare Part B? Changes to ASP calculations. It should come as no surprise that maximum fair price calculations will be implicated, and ASP will go away when the 15 drugs are named. The Part B drugs are named in February of 2026. I know everyone will be waiting and watching for that, but this is just the MFP will take the place of ASP. So I think we're seeing CMS's earnest attempt to broadcast and formalize that proposal because we're only two short years in 2028 when those Part B drugs will be sold at MFP, and therefore they'll be sold at MFP plus a certain percentage. So ASP is going away for those directly negotiated products. ASP plus 6 will remain for non-negotiated products, and there's clearly greater transparency for separately payable covered outpatient drugs and 340B drugs paid under OPPS. Now, for those of you who are on the phone from pharmaceutical manufacturers, you will want to make sure that your brand team colleagues understand these changes, your brand finance colleagues understand these changes. Certainly your government price reporting teams are aware of some of the new price reporting challenges and administrative burdens that they're going to have. Even field-based reimbursement managers that are calling on large accounts, buy and bill physicians, and key account managers that are working with large health systems. I think all of them need to understand all of these new payment reforms that are going in place in 2026. If you'd like greater information to share with those internal colleagues, please do not hesitate to reach out to either Sean, myself, or John Warren.
All right. Thank you, Kent. John, anything to add?
The only thing, just really quickly, and I know we're up on time, ASP, particularly under OPPS or the physician fee schedule, has been continuously evolving over, the 12, 13, 14 years that it's been in place. So what we're seeing here is not really anything dramatic in terms of an all of a sudden shift away from sort of what the agency has historically thought of when it thinks of ASP. Instead, I think it is a gradual evolution a gradual continued evolution of the system, which makes complete sense to me.
All right. And I want to thank you both, John and Ken, for your observations here today. And I want to thank all of you who are attending. We are going to have some future webinars, and they are on the screen in front of us. Something on some new technology add-on payments and analysis of the past 20 years or so of CMS's treatment of new technology add-on payments, demystifying the coding application process, and also a special focus on clinical laboratory policy evolution. So if you're interested in any of those, you can subscribe at the link that I just put in the chat, and we'll also send it around on the email. I should also remind everyone that we did record this webinar, so we're going to make sure everyone has access to a copy of the video and the transcript, and we're also going to share the slide deck with people. So hopefully you will have lots of information that you need. And also, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to follow up with any of us. So if there's anything else anyone needs, our contacts in the slide deck, and we look forward to hearing from you. Thank you so much. And thank you, John and Ken, again.
Thank you.
Thank you.